Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our drought management webinar series, and this is one of 6. My name is Jessie Jim. Donet and Schlinigi, egg Lashtin and Schlin, Senam Bissling Bushichin, Chiji Dashi, Torichi, me Dashinale, Say Ahe, Dan Nasha, I'll put on Sun and Schlin. I am the New Mexico NAPS Project Field Coordinator. Our webinar this evening is going to cover the making of the U.S. Drought Monitor and how to report drought impact. I know that we had teamed up with the Southwest, the USDA Southwest Climate Hub, where we put this drought management series together to educate our producers to know how we're put into how the region is put into to determine the drought. I'm sorry, stumbling over my words. And so before we get started here, I'm going to do an introduction of our program. The Native American Producers Success Project, or NAPS Project in short, is a collaborative effort between Dene Inc., a nonprofit organization, the New Mexico Cooperative Extension Services, and Dene College Land Grant Office. The NAPS project consists of field staff located both in New Mexico and Arizona. The New Mexico NAPS field staff consists of myself, Jessie Jim, and Jana Johnson. The Arizona NAPS field staff are Sadie Lister and Sharon Sandman. So we provide outreach and technical services throughout the Navajo Nation. This project is being funded by USDA's Office of Partnership and Public Engagement and the Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. Okay, so the overall goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers. To help us achieve this goal, there are some activities that we are currently providing in 4 key areas, which include improving Navajo farm and ranch operations through a series of workshops, focusing on crop-related topics and livestock-related topics. We are also increasing our Navajo farmers and ranchers' knowledge of and access to available programs and technical assistance provided by USDA, BIA, Navajo Nation, New Mexico Cooperative Extension Services, the Dene College Land Grant Office, and other professionals. This is also being accomplished through our resource fairs held annually. If you missed last year's fair, we have it recorded, and so those sessions are available on our Facebook and YouTube channel. Okay, so we are also strengthening the organizational capacity of the Navajo Farmer and Ranchers Congress to address the current and future needs of Navajo farmers and ranchers. So if you are interested in being part of the Congress, please contact us. And last but not least, facilitating Navajo farmers and ranchers' use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, and RMA programs. I would like to introduce our speaker today, Brian Fusch. Is that correct, Brian? Okay, great. Is a faculty member and climatologist from the National Drought Mitigation Center, and he oversees the monitoring program area within the center. DMC is housed within the School of Natural Resources at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Brian's work is focused on drought-related issues and research projects. The drought-related work concentrates on research involving mitigation, risk assessment, monitoring, impact, and reporting of drought. As a climatologist, Brian works on applied research projects for the NDMC, as well as authoring the United States Drought Monitor and the North American Drought Monitor, along with several others. This work helps others better understand the impacts related to drought across a diverse group of industries, from agriculture, energy, tourism, transportation, as well as social and environmental concerns. So Brian is our presenter, and I want to go ahead and turn the screen over to you, Brian. So if everybody can hold their questions to the end, we'll have a Q&A session.
Just wanted to, again, introduce myself. My name is Brian Fuchs, and I am a climatologist by training, and I am with the National Drought Mitigation Center, and we are housed at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. The National Drought Mitigation Center has a long history of working with partners in the region. We have worked with many different tribal partners, as well as those at state and federal levels in the Southwest, and over the last year with USDA and working with the Southwest Climate Hub on various issues in the Southwest and throughout the whole Western United States. So I will be talking about how the United States Drought Monitor is put together each week, which is important to know the details of, because over the last several years, more and more programs have been tied to the United States Drought Monitor, with some different relief programs being administered from USDA as well as the IRS. And even some states have started using the Drought Monitor map for their state level drought planning. So I will talk about how the Drought Monitor is put together, and I will also go into all the different data that we look at and how that is done. I've been a U.S. Drought Monitor author now going on 16 years, and have learned a lot through that process, not only of how drought behaves in different parts of the country, but also what's important as far as looking at impacts. And so that will be the end of my talk, is I'll talk about what drought impacts are and how people on the ground can relay that information so it does come across the desk of the Drought Monitor authors when we're putting together the map and we're able to see that information on impacts. So I will start through this presentation. So when we start talking about drought monitoring, scientists have been trying to do this for a long time. And this map here is one that USDA put out way back in 1934, showing areas of the country where crop conditions were being impacted due to drought in the country. And again, this was during the Dust Bowl. So there was a lot of interest in what was going on and who was being impacted. But as you can see, it was really related to just crop conditions, and the areas aren't overly well defined. They were fairly general. So what we have been doing since that time is we've had drought indices, and many of the participants here have probably heard of the Palmer Drought Severity Index. That was really the very first attempt at a drought index. And again, this effort came out of USDA, that Wayne Palmer was tasked with this idea of developing a drought index for the country. And we still use the Palmer Drought Index today. There was a lot of good attributes with it, but it was still only a single drought index. And so as that approach developed, we started seeing more drought indices, and they were each telling us similar but different ideas about what drought conditions were looking like. So in the late 90s, there were a couple scientists, one from the Drought Mitigation Center, actually my boss, Mark Svoboda, and one from the Climate Prediction Center, a forecaster by the name of Doug LeCompte. They came together with some ideas of how can we take all the information associated with these different drought indices we have and put them together into a single product. And in late 1999, some preliminary ideas of what the U.S. Drought Monitor would look like came out, and this map kind of shows some of those earlier attempts. So it was more of a hybrid approach where we were taking attributes of many indices and indicators and putting them together into one map, versus what we're seeing on the left with the Palmer, that was only looking at one drought index, but still useful in identifying drought areas. So the idea behind the Drought Monitor was we have an objective piece. So we have indicators and indices of drought that we have, but then there's also this subjective piece. We knew that when we started putting this information together, that we needed some validation, that we needed people from around the country to follow up and say, yes, this is what we're seeing on the ground. These are the type of issues we're seeing. So the drought monitor process had built in a level of subjectivity where we were getting information from people around the country on just what was happening in their backyard and different information that they were getting related to drought. And so instead of using just that one individual drought index, we started bringing in all this information together, and we started combining it into a single product, which in turn turned out to be the U.S. Drought Monitor. And here I have the most latest map of the Drought Monitor. So with today's map, these come out every Thursday morning, regardless if it's a holiday or not. We always have a map out every week. And you can see on this map, there's a lot of different labels and lines and different colors, and each one means something differently. So starting with the letters and the lines on the map, those are trying to identify what drought-related impact types we have. So the S's are talking about short-term drought, which is typically timeframes of 6 months or less. The L's are showing long-term drought, where we're seeing issues in a time scale of greater than 6 months. And then, currently most of the Southwest is labeled as S and L. And that's showing that we have some long-term drought issues coupled with short-term drought issues, and combined, that's what we're seeing on the map. And so that's what those labels mean on the map. And then also, we have the different intensity levels, and I'm going to get to that in a different slide. So with the Drought Monitor map, I showed you that early attempt by USDA that was really focusing on looking at crop conditions. And we know there are several different types of drought that we are dealing with. So we have meteorological drought, agricultural drought, hydrological drought, socioeconomic drought, and ecological drought. All these drought attributes are unique in their own way, but the Drought Monitor map, we're trying to show all of these on a single map. So sometimes questions come up that, we had a really good rainfall event over the last several weeks. How come we're still seeing drought on the map? And maybe the shorter term drought or meteorological or agricultural type of drought did see some improvement, but maybe the hydrological or ecological drought had not even responded yet to those precipitation events. So that's just one example of how all the different types of drought can be shown on a single map. And there are many different pieces to it. It's just not focused on any one of these types. So some background on the Drought Monitor map, and I showed the URL for the map in the upper right-hand corner. This is a three-way partnership between the National Drought Mitigation Center, partners within NOAA, which is the Weather Service, as well as USDA. And this three-way partnership developed from the beginning on the Drought Monitor, that we did not want one single entity or agency being the home of the Drought Monitor. We wanted this collaborative effort to continue. And so far, going into our 21st, 22nd year now, this has been quite successful. In a typical year, the website gets 12.5, 13 million hits and visits by people looking for information. And when we're in an active drought year like we were this year, with a lot of the country in drought and a lot of significant drought, that number jumps up to almost 20 million web hits in a given year. Like I mentioned earlier, the Drought Monitor is now used in several USDA programs, but it's also being used by the IRS for tax deferrals for livestock producers who have to sell livestock due to drought, that they can claim that on their taxes, so they don't have to take capital gains on those animals that they sold. And so the IRS has been doing that for several years now. And there's many other programs that are directly tied to the Drought Monitor yet today, and even more coming on board. So right now we have 10 current authors and 2 legacy authors. The Western Regional Climate Center was the last group to come on board, and they're out in Reno, and they came on board in 2008. I don't know how many of you know David Simmerall, but he's our Western author out there. And I talked about those validators around the country. So through an email list server, we have 450 or more local experts, what I call them, that we communicate through an email list server. And these experts help to relay information from the ground, from stakeholders and producers. And they also relay information on impacts and data that may be unique or local to a specific region. So we all communicate through this email list server, and that gets done with several hundred emails in a given week when the drought monitor map's being made. So I talked about the 5 drought intensity levels that are shown on the map. So we have D0 through D4, and D0 is considered abnormally dry, so that's not considered drought on the map. So abnormally dry conditions are utilized or identified when we are going into a drought or when we're recovering from a drought. Maybe we still have some lingering issues, but conditions have improved. So that's where abnormally dry would get used. And then the 4 drought intensity levels are from moderate, severe, extreme, and exceptional drought all have specific qualities associated with them that the data need to meet to get to those levels. I'm going to talk about that here coming up. So when we're looking at the information and the data to put together the drought monitor, I call it the convergence of evidence. It's like a law trial where all the information, all the data is put out in front of you, and you have to make the best determination to a single solution from everything that's presented. So even though we're looking at several dozen inputs in a given week, we don't put all emphasis on a single piece of that information. We look at all of them at one time. And multiple indicators and many types of information are part of this analysis. That we look at this information and data and we see how they are working together. And then the key part is the impacts are the ground truth. But the one problem with the impacts is they're not monitored to the extent that other data are measured. So this key statement, you can't measure what you don't monitor, really stands true when we start talking about drought impacts, because we need to have more information on drought impacts. If we don't have anything to compare the physical attributes of all the different drought indices, of several dozen pieces of information that we're looking at, it's really hard sometimes to make that clear determination of what is happening on the ground. So a few things when we're looking at putting together the drought monitor map, we do look at, it's not a model. The map is made manually each week, and it started from the previous week's map. So we don't redraw the map every week. We start from the previous week, and we tweak the lines where the data says it's appropriate to do so. The drought monitor is not interpreting only precipitation. And this is a key point also, because many times, again, people really know when it rains and does not rain, but there are other products out there that do a good job of showing us where it does rain and where it hasn't rained. And the drought monitor is using that information, but we're not trying to replicate it. We're using a lot of other information besides just precipitation. The drought monitor is not a forecast or a drought declaration. Some states do use the drought monitor for an official drought designation from the state's governor, but it is not a forecast. It's not looking forward. It's supposed to be a snapshot of what conditions look like at that particular point in time. The drought monitor does not take into account any relief programs when the map's being made. So those programs that are utilizing the drought monitor are doing so because it is an unbiased piece of information that they know, those who are administering the programs know that we're not taking into account the need for relief or even the eligibility for relief. That's not even considered at all when the drought monitor authors are putting the map together. I talked about the short and long-term impacts and the time scale, so I'll pass that on. The incorporation of local expert input is completely valuable in this process. Not only does it validate those pieces of data that we are looking at, but we get a better feel of what drought means locally and what the hardships are and what the challenges are locally that, maybe we do not completely understand. So having those local experts participating in the drought monitor process really does help to get a better understanding of what drought is or is not for a particular region. As an author, I have to be as objective as possible using the percentile methodology, which I'll talk about here coming up, and using this convergence of evidence. I don't get a bonus by showing more drought or less drought. I want to have the map be as accurate as possible using all the data and information that's available to me. So the physical data and the drought indicators must support the depiction on the map, and the impacts validate that, but the impacts alone will not change the depiction on the map. We need them to work hand in hand along with the physical data that we're looking at. So the whole basis behind the drought monitor is this idea of this percentile ranking methodology. And why this is important is because we know when we start looking at all these different data sets, not all of them have the same period of record. We may have 80 years of precipitation record, maybe 50 years of stream flow record. We may have 30 years of satellite information, et cetera. So how do we look at these individual pieces of data side by side when they all are covering varied periods of record? Well, the ranking percentile methodology is the way we can do this because it can be applied to any parameter and it can be used for any parameter for any period of length of time. And it also puts it into historical perspective, which is telling us how many occurrences in a given period of time are we seeing conditions of this type. So to be in abnormally dry conditions on the map, so we're going to start with that D0 category. That's saying that the majority of the indicators and indices that we're looking at are falling into the lowest or driest 21st to 30th percentile. Saying if we took the entire period of record and ranked it from driest to wettest, or lowest reading to highest reading, and then put the current data into that ranking, it would fall in the 21st to 30th percentile. So to be in drought on the map, that's saying that the majority of those indices and indicators are falling in the 11th to 20th percentile. So be in severe drought, the majority of them are in the 6th to 10th percentile, or about a 1 in 10 year type of return interval. To be in extreme drought, the majority of those indicators in the D3 category are falling into the 3rd to 5th percentile, or about a 1 in 25 year type of drought event. And then when we get to exceptional drought, which we do see on the map right now, the majority of those indicators are falling into the 1st to 2nd percentile, meaning that we're basically seeing the drought of record, basically of our written record, the 1st or 2nd driest event that we've seen. And that has a return interval of about once every 50 to 100 years. So every piece of data that we look at is categorized from D0 through D4. And then again, we're looking at that convergence, because what happens is not too often do all these indicators line up nicely and say one story. We may have indicators from D1 to D4, but we're looking at what's the majority of those indicators saying. Are the majority of them falling into D2? Are they falling into D2 and D3? And if so, we need to start looking at the impacts to see, okay, is it a D2 event or is it a D3 event? And that's where the importance of impacts come into play, that it can kind of be the deciding factor of where the author will put that drought category. So it's very important for us to look at all the data and get an idea of where all the indicators are falling. And looking at the time series of drought. So the drought monitor has only been around since the year 2000, but we have data that go back all the way to the early 1900s. And we utilize that data to get an idea just how many dry periods and wet periods we have had. And then again, we have a longer period that we can rank the current data up against. And looking at the Southwest area down below. So in the history of the drought monitor, there's many in the Southwest region, and this is the Southwest USDA Climate Hub area. Many have said that since the early 2000s, we've been in drought. And when you look at the time series, you really see some more intense periods, but really drought has not gone away in the region over the last 21 years. We have seen continuous drought in some way, shape, or form over some portion of the region during that time. And when we start talking about these drought categories, using the percentile ranking method, it takes away that subjective or anecdotal information. Oh, it's really, really dry, we should be D3 or we should be D4, or I don't ever remember it being this dry, we have to be D3. And that's where we let the data really do the talking, so to speak. That when we can compare current conditions to maybe some past drought events and show, yes, there have been worse droughts, or maybe this is the worst it's ever been, that it does put it into a scientific perspective that we can, again, assess that same principle throughout the entire country in doing the map. So how is this all done? So we have 10 authors I mentioned, and we are located around the country. So half of our authors are located in Washington, D.C., 2 within the USDA, and 3 within NOAA partners at the Climate Prediction Center. 1 is in Western North Carolina at the National Center for Environmental Information. 3 of the authors are in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm one of them at the NDMC. And then we only have the 1 Western author out at Reno at the Desert Research Institute. So the requirement of the author is that author must work at a regional or national center, someone who's looking at large parts of the country in their day-to-day work. Some of these are government agencies, some of them are universities like myself or the Desert Research Institute, which is both. And again, we're all volunteers. We do this as part of our regular jobs, so we don't just completely focus on the drought monitor 100%. We shift this around to all 10 of the authors to help out. We typically do a 2-week shift and then pass it on to the next person. So with the drought monitor, I talked about all this data that we look at. And with the purple circles, most all the data that we look at falls into one of these 6 areas. So we have drought indices, we have soil moisture, both modeled and measured. We have hydrological data with stream flow, reservoirs, and wells. We have a lot of remote sensing data using more and more satellites, especially over the last decade. We have precipitation and snowfall. So not only do we get the precipitation from the National Weather Service co-op stations and CoCoRaHS sites, but also the upper elevation SNOTEL sites that USDA oversees as well. And then the final piece of that puzzle is that local expert input and that impact information that's being relayed to us. So most of this information is analyzed each week, falls into one of these categories. But in any given week, we're looking at 40 to 50 unique indicators as a drought monitor author, putting them all into that percentile ranking methodology, and then knowing from these data exactly which drought category from D0 through D4 that they fall in. And then we make a determination based on all that information, along with the expert and local feedback on impacts and other information to draw those lines on the map. So when we are looking at the map, we're letting the data drive the map. So this is an area of Colorado into New Mexico of just some of the data. This is the standardized precipitation index that we were looking at, and this is an older map. But when I'm doing the map as an author, this is what I see. Typically, we do not even have the geopolitical boundaries turned on. And the reason behind that is we want the data to drive the map. We don't want to worry, oh, we're in Colorado, or oh, we're in New Mexico, or we're right up on a state boundary or a county boundary or anything like that. We want to let the data itself drive the map. And this is, again, this is just one of the many pieces of data, but this is what it looks like on my GIS project when I'm drawing the map. And I talked about some of these key indicators. And so we do look at a lot of information. We have the drought indicators during the growing season. There's specific tools we look at. In the West, we look at SWASI. Reservoir levels are important. Snowpack is especially important in what those runoff forecasts are looking like. The snow water equivalency too. We all know that some snows have more water in them than others. And so that's something we really track, especially through the winter time of the water year, on just what's being accumulated in those upper elevations, or how much is even being lost. Sometimes we have those warm spring events that really take a lot of that snowpack away before that runoff can even reach the lower elevations. And again, stream flow is key out in the West is too. A lot more Western indicators are more hydrologically related, but we still know that agriculture, meteorological drought, agricultural drought, ecological drought are equally important, but sometimes they're not the drivers on what we're seeing out in the West. So over the last decade, I've mentioned this earlier, we've been fortunate enough that scientists have dedicated a lot of time in putting some new tools together that are utilizing different climate data as well as satellite data in these combined tools that are looking basically at the hydrological or water balance between the atmosphere and the ground and the vegetation that's growing on it. So tools such as the evaporative stress index, the quick response index or quick dry drought index, the evaporative demand drought index or EDDI, GRACE satellite soil moisture analysis, and the vegetation drought response index, VegDry. We also had a new one that came out here recently, GrassCast, which is looking at forage production for the growing season. So we're utilizing a lot more satellite data. And what's nice about the satellite data is it is very high resolution, and we can get down to some very fine scale attributes when we're drawing the drought levels on the map. One of the key features about the Drought Monitor is that once the map is completed and published, no changes will be made retroactively. Oftentimes I will get an email or a phone call that it could be October and someone's talking about what the Drought Monitor map maybe looked like back in June. And they maybe have comments saying, well, I don't feel the map was right or whatnot. But once the map is finalized, it's done, that we don't make any additional changes. And that's why it is a weekly map, that in some instances, we do know that some drought changes maybe were missed. And so that gives us the opportunity in the next week or the following weeks to make those changes for either improvements or degradation, but we don't go back in time and make any changes. And that's been the policy since the Drought Monitor came about. So how are regions and states feeding into this process? Between the regional climate centers, the climate hubs, state climatologists, we have Native American tribal input as well, and COCORAs. Some states have their state drought task force getting together. All these different processes are taking place in a given week, pushing information up to the Drought Monitor author, which is helpful because when we have more people on a localized level discussing those conditions prior to sending that information to us, we get more of a consensus on what the data and feelings are at a local level of what drought should look like. Some examples of the decision making. So the Farm Bill has included the Drought Monitor. Some of the fast track drought designations have been associated with that. One of the big ones has been the Livestock Forage Disaster Program that so far it's paid out over $7 billion in payouts to livestock producers directly related to the Drought Monitor. The Weather Service is using it for drought information statements. And there's different groups that are starting to use the Drought Monitor more and more. I talked about IRS as well, and there are others. So this is just a brochure that's available online with some of the items I talked about and a URL to the PDF. It's also available in Spanish. We also have a Spanish section to our website that for those who are working themselves in Spanish or working with partners or stakeholders who their primary language may be Spanish, most all of this information is available in Spanish to those stakeholders as well. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is how to contribute drought impact reports or condition reports to that can help with the Drought Monitor process. So the National Drought Mitigation Center, we have this Drought Impacts Toolkit. And so we have condition monitoring observations, or we call CMOR observations, CMOR. We have the Drought Impact Reporter, and we also have the Visual Drought Atlas. And I'm going to talk about all these here. The URL is droughtimpacts.unl.edu, and all this information is found there. So with the condition monitoring observation, our CMOR reports, these are the opportunity for anyone to submit information about what their local drought impacts and conditions are looking like. And so on the right-hand side, you can see that the colored dots go from severely dry to mildly wet. The browns and reds basically are those dry conditions. And this is looking at what was observed for 2020. And you can see that in some parts of the country, there are clusters of reports coming in. Southwest Missouri, eastern Wyoming, even in Colorado and parts of Utah, there were some clusters of regions that reported more of these condition monitoring reports than others. You can also see on this here that there are different categories that you can tie these to. So it could be crops or livestock, fire, wildlife, freshwater fish, household, community hydropower, and then also there's the ability to attach photos to these. And so this is something that gets updated as the reports come in, but it also gives the user, there's a form to fill out as kind of a survey form that whoever wants to put this information together, they can relay anything that they're seeing on the ground. And they can also include photos with this as well. And then it gets put on this map and it's archived forever. And it does give the Drought Monitor authors an idea to click on these dots and we can get the information of what was being relayed in those reports on this interactive interface. Now, for those that know what CoCoRaHS is, or the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, or you may even be CoCoRaHS observers, they're also doing something similar to this for condition monitoring, where you can monitor from severely wet to severely dry. And these observers report each day. So in essence, observer could report something every single day. And we bring these into the CMOR report interface as well. We work with CoCoRaHS, so you won't have to do both. If you're a CoCoRaHS observer, you can fill out that report here and we get that as well, or you can fill out the CMOR report. But basically what it does is it gives the opportunity for people on the ground to provide feedback on the level of wetness or dryness that they're seeing. And again, we can see this throughout the entire country. Now, the legacy product that we have at the Drought Mitigation Center is this Drought Impact Reporter. And again, you can see there are different categories such as agriculture, fire, different relief, water supply, water quality, plants and wildlife, tour and rec. And you can drill down into these different states and see what kind of impact reports have been created. Now, most of this information comes directly from media reports. So for example, if an area is having water restrictions or water shortages, and there's a newspaper story about that, we subscribe to a clipping service and we have someone go through those stories and then they put that information into the Drought Impact Reporter. And this has been around since about 2005 now. So there's several thousand of these reports in over time that you can go back and look at, or get more information about what different impacts have been experienced in a region. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about here is this visual drought atlas. So several times, this was started by the Skip Risa down in Oklahoma several years ago. And they wanted to start creating a visual drought documentation of what conditions looked like 4 times a year. So they would send out information asking people to go out in their area, their backyard, and take pictures in all 4 directions. And at least 4 times a year, it was asked to even do it even more frequently if they wanted to, but at least 4 times a year. So we could start getting a baseline of what those landscapes looked like, both for wet and dry conditions. Many times as a Drought Monitor author, I have people send me photos. Well, look how bad it is. Look at these photos. The photos are telling the whole story. But the problem with that is we don't have, and I don't know myself, what does it typically look like this time of year? Is it always brown? Is it always dry? Or is it typically green and lush this time of year? So those are the things that the Visual Drought Atlas is trying to help fill in. And also on those CMOR reports, that people can send in photos, but if they do it on a regular basis, all of a sudden we start having a baseline for not only dry conditions, but wet conditions or even normal conditions of what the landscape should look like. And so anyone can submit photos here, and these are archives. So these go back in time and you can actually look at a map showing where all these photos where they have been logged at through time. So just a quick shout out to our partners. We work with a lot of different groups and there's so many people to name. I'm not going to try to do it because I'm going to leave someone out by accident. And here is my contact information, and we will open it up for any questions that you may have for me at this time. Thank you. So a question in the Q&A asked, will the PowerPoint be made available? And I'm guessing it will be. I can send it tomorrow when I get back into the office. But yes, I think we will share these PowerPoints for the entire series. But I'll let someone who's running the series answer as well. So the next question from Lisa Do you know if weather stations from the USDA NRCS scan network are included in the drought monitor data? Yes, the scan network is part of the information that we are bringing in from USDA along with SNOTEL. There are many networks besides the National Weather Service co-op sites that are being utilized, and SCAN is one of them. What percentage of COCORAs are actually used in the drought monitor? That's a good question, Sadie, and probably one I can't answer offhand, because with the COCORA sites, a lot of times there's two different things. So for condition monitoring, those are all being used. So anything that's being relayed through COCORAs as far as condition monitoring reports, those are being utilized each week. With precipitation, the COCORA sites are mostly utilized to show areas where it did and did not rain, because without having a long history behind them, the COCORA's observing sites basically help us fill in along with other tools, knowing the extent of where rainfall did or did not fall. But there's over 12,000 COCORA's observers in the US right now. I'm guessing that about half of those provide daily reports. And for those who are observers, a report of 0 or no precipitation is important to have. And I think the last I had heard from the COCORA's partners that on any given day, they do get about half of those 12,000 or so COCORA's observers reporting. Was there anything about the drought monitor process that I explained that didn't quite make sense to folks that you'd like me to go over again? I'd be glad to do that as well.
Thank you, Brian. That was a good presentation. I would just, I forgot to mention another important, one of our co-sponsors here, the Southwest Climate Hub. Helena Deswood, thank you for organizing this, getting the presenters together. And then again, thank you, Brian. Just a little background on the Southwest Climate Hub that I forgot to mention. They are one of 10 network hubs across the nation working to support resilient agro ecosystems and forested landscapes in the face of climate change. They operate in 3 functional areas: science syntheses, convening, and decision support. The Southwest Climate Hub is located in the Jornada Experimental Range in Las Cruces, New Mexico. The hub is the Southwest Climate Hub co-launched the Drought Learning Network. The Learning Network is a consortium of climate service providers and resource managers, strives to share critical drought-related knowledge to build future resilience. Okay, so thank you again, Helena, Brian, everybody that joined us this evening. Thank you for taking a putting time aside. I'm sorry, I'm just one of those evenings, I guess. I see some comments in the chat box. Okay, awesome. All right, so thank you everyone again, and then join us next week for our second of the 6 series. Next week we will have USDA FSA programs, drought programs. Lisa from Farm Service Agency of Los Lunas will be presenting. Helena, Sadie, Michael, do you guys have any closing words for our group here tonight?
This is Michael Patrick, and I'm with New Mexico Cooperative Extension Service, and we're one of the principal sponsors of the NAPS program. And I want to thank both Helena and Jesse and Sadie for putting this program together. And Brian, a great presentation. I think we all learned a lot, and looking forward to putting this information to good use. So thank you again, Brian.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the kind words.
Okay, well, we are waiting. those of you guys that are on, I'm going to be launching a poll here, and it's a way for us to get your feedback from today's presentation and then for future presentations. So if you guys could go ahead and fill it out. I think it'll take less than 45 seconds to fill out. Should be popping up. So if everybody can answer the poll questions, that'd be great. Okay, I can see them rolling in. Okay, so while we're waiting, just to remind everybody, if you missed part of it, or if you know someone that wanted to join this evening, we recorded this session, and then we'll be editing it and then posting it on our Facebook account and then also our YouTube channel. Okay, I think everybody has answered our poll questions. Okay, so thank you again, Brian, everybody that joined us. We will see you all next week.